Shields and swords, feel the wars, fighting my blood down to the core. Warriors from medieval age, fear the reign of night brigades. Crusades into the room, moving through the temples and tombs. Scared and placed, prepare to face Professor Awesome and the minions of doom. 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 Professor Awesome and the minions of doom.
Comparison papers often seem to be some of the most simple for students, but I find that students often are challenged by them, and they're usually challenged because they are confused by the seeming simplicity of it. Sometimes they're miscalled compare and contrast papers, but that would be a wrong way to think about it, because any comparison implies a potential contrast. So you should just think about them as comparison. Comparing doesn't necessarily mean showing the similarities nor showing the differences, but rather dealing with both of those in some way. The reason that they're challenging for students is that students often want to just list similarities or list differences as if that is a paper. And so you'll often find very bad thesis statements that say things like, X and Y have many similarities and many differences. If you have this as a thesis statement of your comparison essay, it should be a failing essay, because any two randomly selected things will have many similarities and many differences, right? Take pineapples and fish, for example. Do pineapples and fish have similarities? Sure they do. Pineapples have similarities with fish in that they're both living things, growing things, right? They're made up of molecules. You'll find them around Hawaii. There are many similar things about them. Are there differences between pineapples and fish? Well, of course there are. Fish are animals. Pineapples are plants. Fish live in the water. Pineapples live on the ground. And there are all sorts of differences between fish and pineapples, right? And this is true for any two things you pick. You can find similarities and differences. So just to say there are many similarities and many differences between these two things, you're saying exactly nothing. You might as well say water is wet and fire is hot, because it is a meaningless statement. If there were no similarities between them, what would they possibly be? If there are no differences, then they are the exact same thing. Therefore, there's no point of comparison in either way. So part of it is students think they have to list the points of comparison, and that is never the way to approach this. More importantly, the question is, why are you comparing these things? Why are you comparing these things? So let's take, for example, pineapples and fish again. Pineapples and fish have many similarities and many differences, but if I just list those similarities and list those differences, it tells us nothing. But if I want to say, which should we have as a pizza topping? Pineapple or anchovies? Pineapples or fish? Anchovies being a kind of fish, right? Then suddenly there's a big difference, right? One gives a salty taste to the pizza. One gives a sweet taste to the pizza. Both of them can have strong flavors. You might ask yourself, well, do we have ham with it? Is there ham on the pizza, we might consider using the pineapple. Whereas if there's the salty ham, you might not want to add the salty anchovies to the pizza. And so forth and so on, right? So differences between ham and pineapple, sort of in general, is a meaningless comparison. But many of you will have a strong opinion about whether you'd prefer pineapple or anchovies, that is pineapples or fish, on your pizza. Right? A very strong opinion, because there's a point of comparison. And so when you're coming up with a thesis statement for a comparison essay, don't start by listing similarities and differences. Instead, start with the question of, why are the similarities important? Or why are the differences important? Why are we comparing them? So take, for example, the typical literary paper. Sometimes assignment will be compare these two characters in this story, or two heroes in two different stories. So let's say that I wanted you to compare Beowulf as a hero to, say, Gilgamesh as a hero. Well, if you just list the differences between them, then, or list the similarities, you've really told us very little. But if instead you were to say, well, Gilgamesh seeks glory and immortality, and eventually realizes that that quest is not going to give him immortality, so he gives up on seeking glory, but ironically gets immortality, whereas Beowulf seeks glory and then achieves that glory and has his immortality because he sought glory, then we can see our point of comparison is something like, through Beowulf and Gilgamesh, we can see two very different attitudes toward the importance of seeking glory. Right? That would be a thesis for a comparison essay, right? We're talking about the difference, but the difference gets us somewhere. We start to see like, oh, they have a particular point of difference that allows us to see the text differently, right? In the same way that differences between pineapples and fish don't make a difference. There aren't that differences between them aren't important until you're asking the question, which one do you want on your pizza? So when you're doing a comparison essay of any kind, make sure that you have a reason, a main point between this comparison, a main point as to why these similarities are important or why the differences are important.